boardwalks that stretched for miles under strings of electric light, places that felt like they'd been there forever and would be there long after we were gone. They weren't. Here are 10 American vacation destinations that were once genuinely spectacular and are now, in one way or another, dead. Number 10. Grossinger's Catskill Resort, Liberty, New York. Before budget airlines existed, wealthy New Yorkers didn't fly south for the weekend. They drove 2 hours upstate to a stretch of mountains called the Catskills. And sitting at the center of it all was a place called Grossinger's. The story starts small. In 1913, Asher and Malka Grossinger, Austrian Jewish immigrants, moved to Sullivan County and began renting rooms to city vacationers. Malka cooked. Their daughter Jenny played hostess. Nobody could have predicted what came next. By the mid-20th century, Grossinger's had expanded into a 1,200-acre resort empire. It had its own post office, its own airstrip, 35 buildings, a dining room that could seat 1,300 guests, an indoor pool the region envied. Over 150,000 people visited every year. The boxer Rocky Marciano trained on the grounds. Jerry Lewis performed in the nightclub. Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds got married there. The place was so culturally significant that screenwriter Eleanor Bergstein, who vacationed there as a child, used it as the direct inspiration for the fictional Kellerman's Resort in Dirty Dancing. Except the real Grossinger's was considerably larger than anything shown in that film. Then the 1960s happened. Cheap airfare opened up Florida, Puerto Rico, Europe. Why drive upstate for mountain air when you could fly somewhere warm? Jenny Grossinger, the beating heart of the operation, died in 1972. The resort never recovered from losing her. By August 1984, in what may be the most desperate marketing move in Catskills history, the resort threw a Woodstock anniversary weekend, complete with tie-dye workshops, a midnight documentary screening, and a performance by David Clayton Thomas. It didn't save anything. In 1986, the Grossinger family sold the property to hotel company Serviso for $9 million. That same year, the main hotel closed forever. Developers came and went over the following decades, pitching casinos, luxury spas, golf resorts. None of it materialized. The main structures were finally demolished in 2018. A remaining building burned in a fire on August 16, 2022. The broader Catskills resort region, once known as the Borscht Belt, had hosted up to 500 properties and 150,000 guests annually at its peak. It collapsed alongside Grossinger's. The Concord Resort, its main rival, went bankrupt in 1997. Kutcher's, Homowac Lake, the exposed lakebed generates toxic dust that drifts as far as Los Angeles. The water is now saltier than the ocean. California has poured over $1.2 billion into managing the Salton Sea's decline. The sea continues to shrink regardless. And if you drive out to Bombay Beach today, what you'll find are art installations among the ruins. Local and visiting artists have been creating pieces in the abandoned town since around 2016, which is one way of coping with the fact that your home became a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Number 8. Asbury Park, New Jersey. In the decades before World War II, Asbury Park was New Jersey's crown jewel. Founded in 1871 by industrialist James A. Bradley as a planned seaside resort, it grew into one of the most sophisticated beach destinations on the entire East Coast. At its pre-war peak, the city had more than 200 hotels. Glenn Miller and Artie Shaw played the dance halls. The Marx Brothers headlined at the Paramount Theater. The boardwalk stretched along a full mile of Atlantic coastline, carousels, arcades, entertainment pavilions, all of it. Then the post-war years dismantled it piece by piece. The Garden State Parkway opened in 1947, and suddenly tourists weren't limited to mass transit to reach shore towns. Competition arrived from dozens of beach destinations. The middle class relocated. Shopping malls pulled commerce away. Civil unrest in 1970 caused over $4 million in property damage to the West Side Business District, and that district was never rebuilt. By the 1980s, Asbury Park had earned the nickname Beirut by the Shore. Hotels were boarded up. The boardwalk looked, by more than a few accounts, like a war zone. The once grand casino building and carousel house stood empty. The city has been recovering slowly since the early 2000s. The Stone Pony, which opened in 1974 as a launching pad for Bruce Springsteen and Bon Jovi, still operates. Convention Hall has been stabilized, but those 200 hotels, those glittering ballrooms, that version of Asbury Park is gone. Number 7. The Baker Hotel. Mineral Wells, Texas. Mineral Wells made its name on water. In 1881, a local judge discovered that the well water on his property appeared to have unusual medicinal properties. Word spread, pilgrims arrived, and by the 1920s, the town had become one of Texas's premier resort destinations. The Baker Hotel opened on November 22, 1929, a 14-story, 450-room Spanish colonial revival tower. It was the first hotel outside a major Texas city to offer air conditioning. The second floor was reserved entirely for mineral baths, steam rooms, and salt rubs. The rooftop Cloud Room restaurant looked out over the Texas countryside. 2 ballrooms, a bowling alley, an Olympic-sized pool. Clark Gable stayed here. So did Judy Garland, Ronald Reagan, and Lyndon Johnson. There's even a local legend that Bonnie and Clyde once checked in under an alias, which, given the era, sounds completely plausible. The decline was tied directly to the military. Nearby Fort Walters pushed Mineral Wells' population toward 30,000 during World War II. When the fort closed in 1946, that population evaporated fast, and the Baker's business dropped sharply. The hotel's owner, Earl Baker, announced he would close the building on his 71st birthday, and he did exactly that in May 1963. A brief attempt to reopen in 1965 failed. The hotel closed permanently in 1972. For the next 5 decades, the Baker stood as a 14-story monument to slow-motion neglect. Too expensive to demolish, too expensive to restore, too prominent to ignore. It was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1982 while still abandoned, which is one of the more bittersweet achievements any building can claim. A major restoration effort began in 2019. As of now, work is ongoing, described as the largest private restoration of a National Register property in Texas history. The Cloud Room, the mineral bath facilities, and the ballrooms are all planned for restoration. Original chandeliers and fixtures have been cataloged and set aside. Whether the Baker Hotel will ever welcome guests again remains one of the great unresolved questions of Texas preservation. But for the first time in half a century, there are real, funded reasons to believe it might happen. Number 6. Coney Island, Brooklyn, New York. Coney Island still exists. People still go there. But the Coney Island of today, one amusement park, hot dog stands, and the beloved Cyclone roller coaster, is a shadow of what the place once was. In the early 20th century, Coney Island had 3 massive competing amusement parks operating simultaneously on one strip of Brooklyn beachfront: Steeplechase Park, Luna Park, and Dreamland. Luna Park, which opened in 1903, was lit by over 1 million electric light bulbs. Dreamland opened in 1904 and was even larger. Together, they essentially invented the American amusement park as we know it. Walt Disney, a documented regular at the original Luna Park, cited it as a significant inspiration for what he would eventually build in Anaheim. At its peak, Coney Island drew over 1 million visitors on a single summer day. The subway extension to Stillwell Avenue in 1920, a nickel fare, earned it the nickname the Nickel Empire. Then came the fires. Dreamland burned entirely in 1911. The original Luna Park closed in 1946. The neighborhood declined. Crime increased. By the 1980s, the former wonder of New York was struggling with arson, poverty, and decay. A new Luna Park opened in 2010, and there have been genuine improvements since. But the golden age of Coney Island ended decades ago, and it isn't coming back. Number 5. Elkmont, Great Smoky Mountains, Tennessee. Most people who visit Great Smoky Mountains National Park have no idea there's a ghost resort hidden inside it. Deep in the woods near Jakes Creek lies Elkmont, a collection of decaying cabins and clubhouses that was once one of Tennessee's most exclusive summer retreats. In the early 1900s, a logging company built a railroad into the Elkmont Valley, and wealthy families from Knoxville followed. 2 private clubs emerged, the Appalachian Club and the Wonderland Club, building summer cottages, dance halls, and recreational facilities along the Little River. When the national park was established in the 1930s, The members negotiated long-term leases that let them continue using their cabins. For decades, well-connected Tennessee families summered at Elkmont while the park grew around them. By the 1990s, those leases had expired. The Park Service declined to renew them, and the cabins were left to the forest. A preservation battle followed. Eventually, several significant structures were stabilized. Elkmont is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Visitors can hike to it today and walk through vine-covered ruins. The Appalachian Club Clubhouse, the original family cottages, all of it slowly being reclaimed by the woods. It's one of the most quietly haunting places in the entire national park system. Number 4. Rhyolite. Nevada. Most ghost towns went bust because a mine ran dry. Rhyolite, Nevada, is no exception. But the sheer speed of its rise and fall sets it apart from anything else in the American West. In 1904, a prospector named Shorty Harris found gold in the Bullfrog Hills, about 120 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Within 3 years, Rhyolite had a population between 5,000 and 8,000 people. A 3-story bank building, a train depot, a school, an opera house, paved streets, electric lights, running water, a stock exchange, multiple newspapers, and over 50 saloons. A local builder named Tom Kelly even constructed a house from 51,000 glass bottles, mostly beer and whiskey, which still stands today. When the financial panic of 1907 hit, investment in Western mining dried up almost overnight. The bank failed. The railroad cut service. By 1910, the population was down to a few hundred. By 1920, effectively empty. The 1930 census recorded 1 person living in Rhyolite. What remains, the skeletal walls of the bank building, the train depot, Kelly's Bottle House, is open to visitors today. It's a genuinely startling place. Buildings that took years to construct and were meant to anchor a city for generations stand alone in the Mojave, with essentially nobody for miles. The bank's concrete shell rises 3 stories against the Nevada sky, with no roof, no interior, just open desert framed by the mountains. Rhyolite had its entire rise and fall within about 15 years. That might be a record even by boom and bust Western standards. Number 3. Hot Springs, Arkansas. Before Las Vegas existed as a destination, before Atlantic City had its casinos, before Miami Beach became a thing, there was Hot Springs, Arkansas, and for roughly 60 years, from the late 1800s through the early 1960s, it was arguably the most wide-open, glamorous, and morally flexible resort city in the United States. The foundation was the water. Hot Springs sits in the Ouachita Mountains, and beneath those mountains, rainwater that fell thousands of years ago percolates deep into the earth, gets superheated by surrounding rock, and emerges from 47 natural springs at around 143 degrees Fahrenheit. The federal government had established the Hot Springs Reservation back in 1832, making it the oldest site currently in the national park system, 40 years older than Yellowstone. That federal protection, however, did nothing to constrain what happened on the surrounding streets. What happened was gambling. Illegal gambling had been embedded in Hot Springs since the Civil War era, and by the early 20th century, it operated in plain sight, protected by a local government that was thoroughly and cheerfully corrupt. Mayor Leo McLaughlin ran the city for 22 years starting in 1926, openly allowing gambling as part of his platform.
In the 1930s alone, over 1 million baths a year were given in Hot Springs. And most of those visitors weren't just there for the water. Al Capone was a regular. He often rented the entire 4th floor of the Arlington Hotel for himself and his entourage, and always sat at an elevated table in the Southern Club, where he could keep an eye on the entire room. Lucky Luciano was arrested on the promenade behind the Ozark Bathhouse while strolling alongside the city's chief of detectives, which tells you everything you need to know about how cozy those relationships were. Owney Madden, one of the founders of the New York Mob and the man who ran the Cotton Club in Harlem, retired to Hot Springs in 1935 and became the city's unofficial overlord until his death in 1965. But it wasn't only gangsters. Babe Ruth first came to Hot Springs as a young pitcher and returned repeatedly to soak in the baths and play golf. At its peak, 5 Major League Baseball teams held spring training in Hot Springs, making it the birthplace of MLB spring training as an institution. Performers like Liberace, the Maguire sisters, and Sarah Bernhardt played the clubs. Tony Bennett is reported to have first performed "I Left My Heart in San Francisco" during a 1963 rehearsal at a Hot Springs club. The city had that kind of pull. Then, in 1964, after years of federal pressure, Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus allowed a crackdown. State law enforcement moved in, seized the gambling equipment, and shut down what the government had formerly called the site of the largest illegal gambling operation in the United States. The operators dispersed. The resort economy, which had been built almost entirely around the gambling, collapsed behind them. Hot Springs fell hard. Bathhouses deteriorated. Hotels sat half empty. The city that had invented the idea of combining mineral baths, high-stakes gambling, and world-class entertainment in one mountain town had no idea how to function without the thing that had made it what it was. Only in recent decades has Hot Springs found its footing again. The Gangster Museum of America on Central Avenue now openly celebrates the characters the city once tried to pretend it didn't know. 2 of the original Bathhouse Row buildings still offer traditional mineral baths. The Arlington Hotel, where Capone held court on the 4th floor, is still operating, currently undergoing major renovations. But the wild, lawless, improbable resort that made this small Arkansas mountain town the destination of choice for both Babe Ruth and Al Capone, that version is gone. Number 2. Steeplechase Park, Coney Island, New York. Steeplechase Park deserves its own entry because it had one of the longest runs and one of the most abrupt endings of any American amusement park. George C. Tillieu opened Steeplechase in 1897, naming it after the park's signature mechanical horse race, which sent riders side by side around the park's perimeter on steel tracks at speeds that were simultaneously thrilling and mildly terrifying, exactly the combination that makes something enormously popular. When a fire destroyed Steeplechase in 1907, Tillieu didn't close. He put up signs charging admission to view the ruins, then rebuilt and reopened. That's the mindset of someone who builds something meant to last. And it did last, another 57 years after that fire, surviving the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and the collapse of every one of its neighbors. While Luna Park and Dreamland burned and shuddered around it, Steeplechase kept running. Tillieu died in 1914, and his children continued as a family business for 5 more decades. Then, in 1964, his heirs decided they'd had enough. They sold the property to a developer named Fred Trump. Yes, that family, who wanted to build apartments. Steeplechase closed on September 20th, 1964. Before demolition began, Trump held a demolition party on the property and invited guests to throw bricks through the park's remaining stained glass windows. Whether that detail makes you laugh or wince probably depends on your disposition. The park was torn down. The apartments were never built. The land sat vacant for years before eventually being absorbed into broader Coney Island redevelopment. The famous Steeplechase funny face logo, that wide, unsettling grin that appeared on everything in the park, became an iconic image of lost American leisure. It still shows up in books and documentaries about New York's past, grinning at something that no longer exists. Number 1. The Pocono Honeymoon Resorts, Pennsylvania. From roughly the 1950s through the 1980s, a stretch of northeastern Pennsylvania called the Pocono Mountains was, without question, the undisputed honeymoon capital of the eastern United States. Couples who couldn't afford Europe and weren't interested in anything adventurous drove up to the Poconos, checked into resorts with heart-shaped whirlpool tubs, mirrored ceilings, round beds, and 7-foot champagne glass-shaped soaking baths, and called it a honeymoon. Penn Hills Resort, Cove Haven, Mount Airy Lodge, and dozens of others competed for newlywed business with increasingly elaborate amenities. Mount Airy Lodge's television commercials ran so frequently through the 1970s and 1980s that the jingle became something approaching a regional cultural artifact. At its peak in the 1970s, the Pocono honeymoon industry was drawing hundreds of thousands of couples annually and employing thousands of local workers. Then the 1990s arrived, and the cultural moment that had created these places simply passed. Younger couples no longer considered a Pennsylvania mountain resort the romantic ideal. Airlines made international travel cheaper and more accessible. Las Vegas repositioned itself as a legitimate honeymoon destination. All-inclusive Caribbean resorts offered sun, beaches, and swimming pools in a single package, often no more expensive than a Poconos weekend. Penn Hills Resort closed in 1998. Cove Haven, which had survived longer than most of its competitors, closed in 2014. Mount Airy Lodge, the one with the ubiquitous commercials, was demolished and replaced by a casino. One by one, the heart-shaped tubs were drained, the round beds dragged out, the mirrors taken down from the ceilings. Photographer Pablo Iglesias Maurer documented what remained of several of these resorts in the years after their closure. Indoor swimming pools turned into indoor gardens, lobby furniture still sitting exactly where it had been left on the day the doors closed. The images inspire emotion that's really difficult to put your finger on, he said. It's a little melancholy. That seems about right. There's something quietly devastating about the end of a place that was, at its core, in the business of making people happy. These 10 destinations all had their moment. Some had several decades of moments. Then, the world moved on. The money dried up, the climate changed, or the people who loved them simply grew old. And what had been living, breathing, thriving destinations became ruins, parking lots, or plaques on a wall. America has always been good at building things that feel permanent. It's not quite as good at keeping them that way. But here's what's worth remembering. The buildings may be gone, the boards may be up, the pools drained, the ballrooms dark. And yet, millions of real people loved these places. The families who drove to Grossinger's every summer, the couples who honeymooned in the Poconos, the kids who ran down the Coney Island boardwalk and rode the mechanical horse at Steeplechase. Those experiences were real, even if the places that held them are now gone. If this video is making you feel something, maybe a little nostalgic for places you've never even been to, go ahead and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel more than most people realize. That's the list. 10 places that were real, that were loved, that are now gone. If there's a forgotten American place you think deserves its own video, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time.